Enschede, the Netherlands. In the years before the war, you could see the city looming from afar. Dozens of factories broke out soot clouds to shroud the city in haze. Enschede steams, stinks, and fumes 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. Only one thing is important here: the textile industry. The Jewish community in town is no different. Traders, fashion shops, and manufacturers. Steamweaver De Nijverheid, with almost 1,000 employees. It has been owned by the Van Gelderen family for 3 generations. Almost immediately after the occupation, all Jewish companies are put under German rules. De Nijverheid included, a so-called Verwalter from Bremen takes over the management. The Van Gelderen family disappears into illegality, and the factory continues like nothing happened. 5 years later, a few months after the liberation, 24-year-old Henk van Gelderen, 4th generation, is ready to take charge of De Nijverheid again. But when he walks through the factory and opens a drawer, he finds this roll of fabric.
De order voor het bedrukken van de ster van de jongen.
The order for making the Star of David. If we had not done it, someone else would have.
Het lot van al die mensen.
That would not have altered the fate of the people who had to wear it. You had to sew it onto the coat.
Yes, that's when you started to feel different.
Ik legde me erbij neer. Ik was een heel gemakkelijk kind blijkbaar.
I accepted it. I was an easy child, apparently.
Of course, you would stand out with such a medal.
Met zo'n medaille.
He was a very sweet, kind man. You wouldn't think he was a pastor, you know.
That you trust someone you do not know well for 100%, the confidence.
Ik ben ervan overtuigd dat geen enkele Joodse
I am sure that none of the Jews that went into hiding would have survived without the help of Overduin and his staff.
De familie Overduin komt uit Leiden. Leendert was de middelste uit een groot gezin en zijn oudere broers.
The family Overduin is from Leiden. Leendert was the middle son.
En geld om hem ook.
His older brothers went to high school and even university, but there was not enough money to send him to school also.
Zijn broer ziek werd, om toch zijn middelbare school.
Eventually, at 25, when an older brother got sick, he decided to get his high school degree. He graduated with a lot of help from his elder brothers. That was the stepping stone to continue to the Free University in Amsterdam and study theology. He was a pastor and preacher. Soon after, he gets his first job in Enschede, where he has never been before.
Het verhaal van Leendert Overduin's story in Enschede starts in 1937 in this church, the Menisten Church. Overduin arrives here in 37, and in those years Enschede is a poor city. It is home to about 100,000 people who almost all work in the textile industry. Overduin arrives here in 1937 and starts as a pastor of a congregation of 60 people who are searching for new inspiration.
It was a small group that separated from the Reformed Church. In the 3 years before the war, he worked in Enschede. The number of members of the congregation doubled. Grandma, who we called Opu, was one of the first members of this small group. He even visited us when I was born. I was born in the anteroom at the house of Opu, and he visited us there.
Ik heb
Most of my childhood, I lived at the Potgieter Street. It was a very small street, so we knew the pastor, Overduin, who lived right across the street. When I saw him, I would say, "Hello, sir," and that was all.
Es ist eine kleine, wurzellose, internationale Clique, die die Völker gegeneinander hetzt. Lassen nicht von dir, nur Segen unseren Kampf!
Here in the synagogue, the heart of the Jewish community in Enschede, the news from Germany is anxiously watched. In this shul, maybe one of the most beautiful ones in Europe, the situation in Germany is constantly discussed. Since 1933, the Nazis have been in power, and there were more and more anti-Jewish measures. Then there is the Crystal Night in 1938. Thousands of synagogues and Jewish shops are set on fire, and hundreds of Jews are killed by incited people. The whole world knows then that the Jews are going to face a difficult time, and the news reaches Enschede as well. One day, Bert Waldstra comes home, and his mother is crying at the kitchen table.
Ik heb mijn moeder nooit echt zo verdrietig gezien.
I had never seen my mother this upset. I asked my mother, what is going on? What has happened? In the village Moit in Germany, where I was born, there was a small synagogue. And last night, this synagogue has been burned down by Hitler's followers. And all those families had to watch the synagogue. And were told that if they did not behave, they would be thrown into the burning synagogue.
I remember it was getting difficult for my parents. Not that they would discuss that with their children, but we could tell.
Ja, we werden er wel wat zenuwachtig van.
Boy, did it make me nervous. But my father would say, "Do not worry, we live in a neutral country. We stayed out of World War I, and if there comes a second, we will stay out of that as well." I trusted my parents entirely.
On a beautiful Whitsunday, May 10th.
A bright day, just like today.
Suddenly, we saw a lot of soldiers in Enschede, German soldiers.
It is war.
On the 10th of May 1940, Germany invades the Netherlands. Suddenly it is war. People are in total shock because war, that is something from last century. Suddenly bombers are flying over Enschede and there is panic. People are on the streets, schools closed, and factories stopped working. Stores are busy due to food hoarding. A collective feeling of panic arises because war, that is something no one has experienced before.
I was 10 years old on the 10th of May, as a child.
In 1940, I was 12. They must have talked about it at home. But as a child, I was not worried.
Ik weet dat mijn moeder mij wekte.
I remember my mother waking me up to tell me we are at war now. The Germans were here. That might sound a bit strange.
I was 14 when the war started. I was really a child, so life just carried on for me.
Soon after, in the morning, a large German tank drove into our street. It was loaded with soldiers carrying rifles. It looked magnificent, to be honest. It was very impressive to a child. I admired their power, not realizing how terrible this was.
Hoe verschrikkelijk dit was.
En dat was een schouwspel waar we de vuur.
What a spectacle that was. Jaw-dropping. Those guys could sing. You'd not believe it. The sergeant would shout, "Sing!" And after a short silence, he would say, "Oh, de schöne Westerwald." They sang by heart while marching. "Oh, de schöne Westerwald, über deine hohen Zeit der Wind so kalt." Can you imagine? After all these years, I still know the lyrics.
Koningin Wilhelmina en consorten zijn dan al gevlucht naar Engeland. En het volk is aan
The Dutch Queen Wilhelmina and her following have fled to England by now. The people are on their own. On the 15th of May 1940, the city of Rotterdam was bombed to the ground. After 4 days of war, 4,000 people have been killed and 7,000 are injured. The Nazis threatened to bomb the city of Utrecht next.
Het einde van het bestaan van...
It is the end of the Netherlands.
Meteen na de capitulatie verschijnt er in alle kranten een
Right after the capitulation, an official statement appears in every newspaper from the Germans to the Dutch people. By order of the Führer, the German army will try to make the occupation as bearable as possible. They will protect the life and property of the people and support peaceful matters where they can. However, the German army will destroy anyone who disturbs the peace and order. In other words, we will try to make it as agreeable as possible, but he who does not want to cooperate will be cracked down.
Vrij snel na de bezetting wordt Leen ernstig ziek, moet geopereerd worden.
Fairly soon after the occupation, Lane gets ill. He needs surgery and cannot work. He's even replaced. He's out of action for almost a year. But in this period of the war, life continues. It is war, but was not grim yet.
Gingen naar school.
We went to school. We still went on holidays to Durnburg in the summer. That was the last holiday.
Ik kan zeggen dat
I can say that I was born in a warm home. My parents had a dream. We have earned well and saved up. We wanted to move away from the apartment above the store. They looked around and rented a house. That is the house we are in now, at the Biscop Street. In that house, we have central heating. I've never seen such a thing. For me, it was like a dream.
Vanaf 1 oktober worden de eerste...
From October 1st, the first German measures are implemented. From then, everybody above 15 needed to identify themselves with such an identity card called Ausweis. For Enschede, this means that 66,000 people need one. This is an original. This also means that 66,000 photos need to be taken. The only people who were happy about this were probably the photographers, thinking that it is not bad for business. There are more rules. There is a curfew, the streets should be empty at night, and bars, cafes, and theaters need to turn their lights off after 11 p.m. Enschede is darkened.
Ik weet wel in het begin dat mijn vader op het huis of je geen licht kon zien.
I remember in the beginning, my father walked around the house to see if there was no light visible. It had to be perfectly closed, and goodness, what if I would turn lights on without the blinds being well closed? Well, then my father or mother would get angry. Be careful, or we will be in trouble. We felt much more responsible than other people, also because we were marked as Jews. We were scared to death to do something wrong, that we could be blamed for something. So they brought us up strict.
21 Januari.
The 21st of January 1941 is an important day for the Jews in Enschede. It is the day of the so-called Jew Declaration. The major orders the police to make an inventory of how many Jews lived in Enschede. For convenience, the Germans have already created this registration form. It says registration form for one person who is fully or partly of Jewish descent. Tragic discussions take place in Jewish circles, debating who is and is not of Jewish descent. But after a few days, 1,368 of these forms find their way back to this city hall, all neatly filled out with name and address. The tragic thing is that most people on that list did not know that they signed their own death sentence.
We were Jews, but we were Dutch Jews.
The terror against the Jews. All their money was taken from them.
My parents got a visit from a German man from the SD, the Nazis' intelligence agency. They told my mother and father to please sign here. Goodbye. It was a horrible moment. I remember that we came back, we lived in such a beautiful house, and how are we going to pay for it? We were not allowed to go to the park. It was prohibited for Jews. We were not allowed to go to the swimming pool. Everywhere those signs. Prohibited for Jews.
They were not allowed to cycle anymore.
I had a beautiful bike, a boy's bike, and had to hand it in. That sort of thing made me very nervous.
Gewoon rechtstreeks door.
Straight home, not attract any attention. That was the way of life. It came naturally for us.
I just wanted to be a real Dutch boy.
Ze mochten zelfs niet op straat op een
They were not even allowed to sit on a bench outside. There was an official letter from the Jewish Council. Any person sitting on a bench with a yellow badge will be deported to the concentration camp that same day. There was not a single German word in that letter. Everyone understood it.
In the summer of 1941, in the dead of night, at the Haxberger Street, 2 telephone wires from the German Wehrmacht were cut. Actually the first real act of resistance here in Enschede, and the Germans are furious. They offer a large reward for reporting the offenders, and the city of Enschede has to pay a large fine of 50,000 guilders, a fortune at the time. And a so-called cable guard is installed. All men in Enschede over the age of 25 have to guard 100 meters of cable 4 hours a day. This also involves the father of Bert Woudstra and Arnold Beckenkamp.
Enschede's men will have to make sure this doesn't happen again. So my dad got a schedule that told him when he had to be cable guard.
My dad had to guard a bit of cable at the Helmer. They walked back and forth, smoking their pipes. They did not take that seriously.
It was fun, actually. My friend lived next door. We took our bikes to the Haxberger Street, bringing sandwiches that Mom made. I believe we even brought them cigars and some bottles of beer.
was een beetje kinderlijke actie natuurlijk.
It was a very childish response, of course, but very drastic anyway.
Op 13 september 1941 wordt er opnieuw een telefoonkabel van de
On
Wehrmacht
the 13th September 1941, another German telephone line is cut. The Germans are outraged, and draconic measures follow. 100 Jewish men from Enschede are arrested and locked up in a high school. There is not a single word about this raid or razzia in the papers. The following day, these 105 men are in a train leaving from Enschede station to concentration camp Mauthausen. One of these men is Frits Woudstra, Bert's father.
Open doen. En mijn vader ging direct naar beneden, want dat heb ik niet precies meer.
Open up. My father went down. I have not seen this. He had to get dressed. My father woke us up and said, "Boys, I'm being arrested. I have to go because another wire has been cut."
Toen ik thuis kwam, dat is voor vader geweest.
When I came home, my father was in bed, ill. That was unusual. I'd never seen him ill in his whole life. I'm sure he got tipped off by the police that he stayed in bed and had not gone to the office. Our Dr. Frank was there when they came to take him, and he said that he was too sick to be transported, so they left him alone. My dad told him he should not go home because they would be waiting for him as well. He said he would go anyway. He said, "My wife is pregnant, then they will take her." So he went back home and got arrested.
Maar die werden dus een nacht opgesloten in het lyceum.
They were imprisoned in the high school we went to. We knew in those classrooms are people who are imprisoned.
En toen ben ik inderdaad naar het lyceum gelopen. Dat heb ik als een...
Then I walked over to the high school, and I can still picture it. There was a policeman, a Dutch policeman, asking, "Little boy, what are you doing here?" I told him I was bringing something from my father, Frits Woudstra. He made me wait in the school hall and shouted upstairs, "Here is Woudstra's son, call Woudstra." My father was standing at the top of the stairs, and the policeman brought his package up to him. My father said hi, and I said hi, and I was not allowed to go to him. So that was it. The next day, they told us that they are leaving. I jumped on my bike, I still had it at this point, and biked to the Beatrix Tunnel under the railway with the boy from next door. We walked up and saw all those men. We saw them enter the train, surrounded by men with guns. And the train drove off.
Dat het alleen maar Joden waren, wisten we niet. Maar gewoon dat er arrestaties waren vanwege het doorsnijden van kabels.
We had no clue that they were solely Jewish people, but we did know they made arrests for the wire cuttings, not that it was a targeted anti-Jewish operation. I think for the Jews, that was the cannon shot that shattered all illusions.
Op de avond na die razzia
The night after the razzia, all the religious leaders of Enschede gather here in the great church. Every religious community is present, including Overduin. Together they express their loathing of the raid. They are furious and agree that the men should come back. Together they make an official statement of objection. The Germans ignore this, and Overduin realizes that now is the time for action.
De eerste keer dat de predikant...
It is the first time that the pastors, priests and chaplains have a real meeting together.
Maar dat pikken we niet. Dus
We do not accept this.
die kwam duidelijk uit de religie voort.
That attitude clearly came from their religion. That was amazing, and I think unique.
In deze stadsvilla...
This gorgeous villa turned into the headquarters of the SD, the Nazi intelligence agency during the war. Before that, it was Sig Menko's home, a well-known Jewish textile factory manager and chairman of the Jewish board of Enschede. He had to report here every Friday at his own home. Every Friday he stood here, ringing his own doorbell to be let in. Every week he sits in his home to hear who was killed that week in concentration camp Mauthausen. We see lists of names, and we see the father of Bert Woudstra, who had been killed only 10 days after his arrest.
Van Bert Woudstra, die is 10 dagen na zijn arrestatie al vermoord.
Every week he makes a new list with new names and new deaths. The Dutch Jews now realize that a trip to Mauthausen is one you never return from.
Kom je nooit meer van terug. Op de laatste...
On the last list we find the name Frank, Dr. Frank, who is Sig Menko's son-in-law, so he can bring condolences to his own daughter.
Dus de huisarts kwam hier en zei, ik moet jullie iets...
The doctor visited us and said, I have terrible news for you. Your husband died of a heart attack. But the following week, my uncle died, and my cousin the next. Then we had our doubts about those illnesses. My mother completely collapsed, and my brother and cousin were devastated. But this boy thought, I do not believe it. It is bullying. He is still alive. My father is a tough man. He is not ill.
All perfectly healthy guys, no older than 40 to 45, and had never been ill. There was no way they just died of a heart attack.
How bad it was that all those Jews were being killed. We really did not know.
In het concentratiekamp Mauthausen.
Ik ben dus ooit, ik denk 30, 35...
Concentration camp Mauthausen. I went there a little over 30 years ago. It was a stone pit where they kept the people occupied by having them carry those heavy stones up the stairs. A completely useless activity. It kept them busy, and if they did not work fast enough, they were pushed, fell down the stairs, and died. All those illnesses were made up. There is no doubt that these people died of their injuries.
En er werd door de leraar gewoon gezegd, ja.
Our teacher told us the Jews had to go to labor camps. Of course, we felt sorry for the Jews, but my brother was also stuck at a work camp. I did not see the difference. We did not realize there was a plan of mass murder. We realized that very late.
This is number 1 Poltgieter Street. Overduin lived here during the war. In September 1941 in the evening, Overduin is here with his sister and his father, and the doorbell rings. They open the door to find a scared Jewish man asking, "Can I stay here?" We are not 100% sure, but this is possibly the first hider in the Netherlands. That word did not even exist yet, hider. Before the end of the year, 30 Jews are hiding in this house, and the house is actually completely full.
Mag ik bij u slapen? Ja.
Can I stay here? Yes. During the first year of the persecution of Jews, 30 Jews reside here. Some say for 2 months, others for 6. It was a hotel for Jews here.
From 1st September 1941, Jewish children are not allowed to attend public schools anymore.
Our sweet teacher, Kobus, pointed out the 5 Jewish kids in our class, and she said, "After the holidays, you are not coming back because I am not allowed to teach you anymore." That day, we said goodbye to our classmates. It was so sad. How awful that you are not allowed to be with us anymore.
Al mijn vriendjes waren mijn klasgenootjes van de lagere scholen, van de middelbare scholen.
I knew all my friends from primary or secondary school. And you were cut off from them. That was the first shock for me.
En dan ging je van de Heekstraat een afschuwelijk...
At the Van Heek Street, we had a horrible, decayed, old school. I can smell the toilets to this day. It was so filthy. But I was scared. As Jewish kids, and we heard stories about arrests and raids, we thought they would put a truck out front and take us all away. I skipped class like my life depended on it. It was strange, the class full of Jewish kids. It felt so wrong. And we were also scared.
There was another school, the Jewish college, in the Lossondersingel. That was a lot closer. That was nice. I was not much of a fighter. If you wanted to live, you had to adapt. That was life.
A star cost 6 or 10 cents. I do not remember. You had to pay for them. You were forced to buy 5 stars per person.
You had to walk around with that star. How horrible is that? Having that star on your chest to show everyone you belong to the bad people? It was horrible.
I never left the house anyway. I always stayed home. We were not leaving anymore because it was too dangerous. I only wore the star when I had to go to the Lossondersingel, to the Jewish school.
In Nederland was het verhaal van...
In the summer of 42, word started getting around that people were being shipped off to work in Germany or Poland. That caused a lot of panic.
Mijn moeder krijgt een oproep dat we ons moeten melden in Westerbork.
My mother got an order that we had to report at Westerbork. We could travel for free and did not have to bring a lot of luggage. My mother had been warned enough and said, "We are not going. We were going into hiding."
She said, "The war will be over before Christmas, just a few weeks." I believed everything my mother told me.
The idea of going into hiding started to live in Enschede, which was a dangerous thing, of course, for the people going into hiding, as well as the aid worker. Many did not dare to do that, even if they had an address, which most of them did not have.
The Jewish Council is a grim invention of the Nazis, meant to pass on anti-Jewish measures to the community. The Germans thought the Jews would be less resistant if the message was brought by respectable Jews from their own circle.
They were used as a pass-through.
In Enschede, factory owner Sigmenko is appointed chairman of the Jewish Council.
Sigmenko af en toe naar vergaderingen.
Sigmenko was sometimes called to meetings in Amsterdam. After Mauthausen, he asked if they should discuss going into hiding. Asher and Cohen told him that this phrase was not in their vocabulary. Sigmenko then picked up his hat and coat. He went home and never returned to their meetings.
The Jewish Council, led by Sigmenko, turned into a resistance movement of sorts.
En toen kwam dus natuurlijk die hele zaak van...
Then there was a contact with Jewish counsel from Enschede who thought this might be an option. They got into contact with Overduin, and that is how it all started.
At that moment, it was clear, and Overduin working together with them.
En Overduin had een aantal medewerkers.
Overduin had a few employees and sisters who went on visits. They said there are possibilities to go into hiding, but you have to let us know you want that.
Mevrouw Woudstra, ik heb van mijn broer...
Mrs. Woudstra, my brother told me in confidence that you are going into hiding. Mr. Overduin might be able to help you.
The neighbor visited us. I thought that was interesting. Why would a pastor visit Jews?
Dat was de eerste keer in mijn leven dat ik überhaupt, denk ik, een dominee lijfelijk ontmoette.
That was the first time in my life I met a pastor. I thought, surely, that is an honest man who wants to help us. He helped my mother before. I had to take off the star, which was burned. All the papers we had, like passports, had to be burned as well. I did not exist anymore.
Spulletjes met een boekje.
I took a few things, a book, a teddy bear, and that is how I ended up in Beerse.
Het was een ongelooflijke...
It was such a brave move to say, okay, send one or two my way.
Every single day he was on the road, on his bike, to find new hiding places for people. Or people who were willing to help others into hiding.
Hij heeft ongelooflijk...
He has been turned down so many times, where people said they were too scared, had young children, any reason. He could not force them, naturally.
The fact that so many people were willing to help Overduin clearly had to do with the fact that he was pastor.
De meeste adressen die Overduin had, waren dus kerkelijke mensen.
Most of Overduin's addresses were people from the church. The doors opened at the sight of the pastor in the street.
Bij wijze van spreken.
Often enough, they still closed the door again. It was not always easy.
Natuurlijk waren er ook mensen die dat niet wilden of dat ze bang waren. Maar dat vind ik ook heel begrijpelijk. Dat ze dachten van ja...
Of course, there were people who did not want this. Who were scared. You have to be able to handle it emotionally. The heroes of the time were those who gave shelter. Unconditional.
Ik heb meegebracht een foto.
I brought a photo of the couple we lived with for 2 years. This was taken in their home.
When my parents talked to the pastor, the kids were not allowed there. I arrived at those people, and they spoke in dialect. I only spoke common Dutch. It was all I knew. They had an entire room for me. They were very kind people, but I could not talk to them. There was not a single book in the house. I had nothing to do.
En op een gegeven moment hoorden we...
Suddenly, I heard someone at the door yelling, "Marie, open up. Do you have Jews here?" We were scared to death. That was the first day. Could we stay here?
It was nerve-wracking. I was in my room, waiting and waiting. You heard all kinds of strange news. War in Normandy, bombings, people being deported. Rewards were offered for hiding addresses. Even as kids, we heard the stories.
When Mr. Dickon, whose house we were staying in, came home at 3, Father immediately asked him what to do. The milkman can be trusted. We did not have to leave. Where else would we go? I have never spoken to the milkman. The first time I spoke to him was after the war. And then he said, "Of course I knew you were there." At the end of the week, there were 2 more milk coupons per week than before, for the family and their 2 sons living at home.
Vanaf het begin van de oorlog was het hier altijd druk.
From the beginning of the war, this was a busy place. School at the Minkman Street, a ration stamps distribution center, was located here. During the war, you needed ration stamps for everything. These are original stamps: meat, potatoes, butter. They were more valuable than money, actually.
Zonder dat kon je...
Without that, you could not live in the city.
Maar hier in Twente...
Here in Twente, Martje delivered money and ration stamps.
Echt een heel lief iemand.
Really, such a sweet person. Very kind and delicate, too. She was a sweet, gentle lady.
En je had gemeenteambtenaren die dus...
Some civil servants embezzled stamps at City Hall. Several officials have been in a club helping Overduin. Then some people contacted him who had robbed stamps. They told Overduin to come to Arnhem, where he could pick up the suitcase. And he went there. He got caught.
The first time Overduin is arrested, he has a suitcase filled with stolen ration stamps. He is caught red-handed. He is brought here, center of Amsterdam, house of detention of the SD and Gestapo. You can see where the cells used to be. That is where they locked people up. Overduin was also imprisoned here and taken to court. He decides to be completely honest with them. He even turns the tables. He tells the judge, the German people are guilty of terrible misbehavior by persecuting Jews. That burden is eased by Dutch people offering them a place to go into hiding. I am a Christian. I help the Jewish. What else can I do? And he hits the conscience of these judges. Later, Overduin is visited in his cell and they ask him, what will you do when you are released? Then he says, I will continue helping the Jewish people. Then, to everyone's surprise, he is released and transported back to Enschede.
I believe that was his best sermon ever.
Maar
He talked his way out of it, one way or another.
I think he must have made an impression by saying he would also help the Germans if they got into trouble.
Na zijn eerste arrestatie realiseert Leen zich dat het echt serieus is.
After his first arrest, Leendert realizes this is serious. He quits his job, stops working, and gets several disguises. Most importantly, he has to go into hiding himself.
Verschillende adressen en opereert van.
He stays at many different addresses and continues from this situation. What touched me personally, what is special, during the time so many people were in hiding, was the concern for everyone's mental well-being. He didn't only make sure everyone had enough to eat, but also gave the right book to a young person when they needed it. The fact that he made time for that as well is very special, I think.
He would come to me and we would talk a bit. He would say, "This must be very hard for you." The attention for me was great.
I thought he was a wonderful man, and he was very nice to me. We were vulnerable at that moment, of course. Everyone who was nice to you, you liked and had a warm feeling for.
One time, he gave me this Bible. I still have it here. You can see it has been used. I have read it all. There are nice stories in it. He never spoke about religion, and he would never attempt to promote the New Testament. Never, not a word.
He cycled to Friesland, a trip of almost 10 hours. Can you even imagine? He had a stomach condition.
Wat een heel mooi verhaal is, staat in een van de brieven die recent opdook.
A great story, written in a letter that we discovered recently in the Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum in Israel. We had not heard anything from our son for a long time. Consequently, Pastor Overduin went on a dangerous trip for us to Bolsvaart. He returned with a recent photograph of our child. I cannot express how much that meant to us. I'm telling you this to make you understand how compassionate he was. He understood our situation and took great risks to give us information about our loved ones. He risked his own life like it was normal, all to help the Jewish people. I remember him visiting us immediately the day he was released from custody.
During the war, there was a deli in this building. In September 43, Overduin is arrested here. It was a coincidence. He was wearing a strange coat as a disguise. He had dyed his hair and was wearing different glasses, but an SD member recognizes him. It turns out he has a fake ID and 32 Jewish ration cards. They go to his house and arrest his sister Marja, too. The Overduin family is busted, but then something special happens. Then the city of Enschede is involved as the major writes a plea, calling Overduin a noble man. The doctor writes a medical statement saying he has had surgery recently and that he is not stable. A surgeon also pleads that he is not well if you look at the medical situation. The strangest thing is the letter from a highly ranking NSB officer from the Dutch Nazi Party. He writes that Overduin is a friend and not an enemy of the Germans.
Toen Leendert de tweede keer gearresteerd werd, zat hij vast in Utrecht en realiseerde zich ook dat dat voor langere tijd zou zijn.
During the second arrest of Leendert, he is held in Utrecht and realizes this would take some time. He had to figure out how he could continue the operation from jail. He comes to the conclusion that the only one who can replace him is his younger sister, Corrie. By smuggling notes out of the prison, he manages to warn her, and then she took Leendert's place.
Zij heeft echt zijn plek toen ingenomen.
The organization Corrie manages can be best described as an underground housing corporation for Jews. The organization Overduin looks after over 1,000 people at this point. In Utrecht, Overduin is interrogated for 3 days and nights, standing the entire time. They have one question: where are those 32 Jews? Or are there more? Overduin confesses that he delivers stamps for 32 people. That is all he wants to say. Brother and sister both sign a declaration with the words, "I do not want to be a traitor." Overduin faces an 18-month sentence, and Enschede has to do without him for a while. It is all going the wrong way.
The 22nd of February 1944 will always be a day of mourning in Dutch history. British and American bombers target several cities in the east of the country. The damage and suffering is immense. Enschede, the hard-working town, was instantly reduced to a mess.
The bombings in October 43 and February 44 caused great disorder in Enschede.
Ontregeld, zou je kunnen zeggen.
People who did important work, also for the Overduins, were killed. Hiding addresses disappeared. People had a half-damaged house and could not provide shelter anymore. There was a form of panic.
Ontstond ook een zekere paniek natuurlijk. Toen heeft hij dus 3/4 jaar in de gevangenis gezeten.
By now, Overduin has spent about 9 months in prison. He released him because he became ill. He was so ill that they were afraid he would die in their care. He would have died there. He was so sick. The commander of the SD did not want him to die in his cell, but it happened to other resistance fighters. They respected this man. He did not die. He recovered. After a year, they started to investigate. They had a feeling there was something with this Overduin.
Daar klopt iets niet.
He was still alive. They asked for information, and the police informed them that Overduin is gone. He has disappeared.
Overduin, die is er niet meer, die is verdwenen.
The Germans were alarmed. Damn it, he is doing it again. They started a systematic search for him. He was in disguise. He put other glasses on. He traveled to Amsterdam and Friesland, so he moved a lot, also in Twente.
Hier in Twente natuurlijk.
The Allies are getting closer, but the Nazis continue to hunt down Leendert Overduin. He is at the top of every wanted list. Then he got arrested for the third time. They take him here to a cell block of the SD in the synagogue. Here they show no mercy. Almost immediately they tell him, tomorrow you will be shot.
Hij is vrijgelaten als een complot. Men wilde hem...
He was released as a conspiracy. People wanted to use him to deal a blow to other resistance fighters. They did that during a meeting at the Sumatra Street. The most important people of the resistance in Enschede are together. Overduin did not trust the situation. He went in through the front door and left through the back door.
In this house, 9 people came together who had been members of the resistance from the start. 2 of them are Mr. and Mrs. Terborg. Suddenly, a kill squad of 3 German trucks stop in front of the house. The Nazis enter and execute the resistance one by one. Only Grandma survives. She was hiding under a table. The rest is killed without mercy one by one. Mother Jeanette begs the killers to spare the life of her 2-year-old son. She is allowed to take him across the street to the butchery where her daughter was already playing. She hands her son to her daughter and says, "Your father is dead. They are going to kill me now as well. Take good care of your brother." She walks back inside, sits down at the kitchen table, and is shot through the back of her head.
An insane move. Those Germans wanted to murder the top of the Dutch resistance, while the Canadians were already walking down the Haaksbergen Street. An absurd act of revenge. Truly incomprehensible. It says enough about the mentality of those people. Within 24 hours, he escaped death twice.
On the 1st of April 1945, Enschede is finally liberated. After 5 years of military occupation, the Dutch flag is waving in front of Enschede's City Hall. There is a huge euphoria in the city. People are celebrating everywhere. The war is over.
But it was so noisy on the streets. There was cheering and clapping. I could not handle it. I went back to my hiding address and crawled in a corner to read a book. All that noise, if you had to whisper for 2 years. Talking out loud was too dangerous in the houses with thin walls. I remember that day well.
En toen ben ik weer bij mijn ouders terechtgekomen.
I then came back to my parents. It was very special. I cried in my mother's arms for over half an hour. I remember her saying, "That is enough now. You know how mothers can be." That was very special.
I was only 15 when the war ended. Still, I was convinced that the gates of the labor camps would open and then the Jewish people would come back home. Slowly, it dawned on us that they were all killed.
En toen hoorden we ook echt dat mijn vader...
Then we were told that my father was really killed. That was when it hit me. In Enschede, we created 24 stones for all the family members that lived here and were killed.
Hier gewoond hebben, vermoord zijn. En hier ligt...
Here's my father's stone. This is the only place where I can commemorate him.
En dat is eigenlijk de enige plek waar ik mijn vader nu kan herdenken. Ja, daarom ben ik ontzettend blij dat hier...
I am incredibly grateful that we have a tombstone of sorts here, where I can commemorate my father. This has turned into an important place for our family.
My father joined the SS in 1943. According to him, he was a Catholic who wanted to fight against unbelievers. A very poor man, off to Germany for work. He started adventuring there and was influenced by the Germans. In 1943, he signed up for the Waffen-SS. He must have felt very important with a gun around his neck.
Dan ben je wat. En ik vond hem...
I thought he was like most people, caring about the people close to them. But if the neighbors die, they do not mind.
Voor hun eigen omgeving. En daar doen ze ook alles voor. Daar willen ze ook wel hard voor werken. Maar als de buren doodgaan, vinden ze niet erg.
My mother kept trying to convince him, even when he was with the SS, to go into hiding.
Toen hij al bij de SS was, om hem over te halen om te onderduiken.
That did not work, and her love turned into an almost psychotic hatred towards him.
Dus op grote schaal werden de mensen die verdacht werden.
On a large scale, people who were being suspected of sympathizing with Nazis got arrested.
Ze werden allemaal gearresteerd.
Dus er waren honderden mensen.
Hundreds of people got locked up in Chulton's textile factory at the Reggestreek. Children were being left alone in the houses.
What did the people do after the war? They set houses of the NSB members on fire and plundered.
When the war ended, there were about 900 members of the Dutch Nazi Party left. One of them was a butcher, on this corner here. Immediately after the liberation, this butcher was dragged out of his house and brought to the factory where they locked him up. His wife and kids were scared and hid inside their house. They have no idea what happened to their father. When they hear someone knock on the front door, and Mr. Overduin is at the door. "Can I come in? I have news about your husband."
De ouders waren gearresteerd.
Parents were arrested and little children were left alone. What would happen now?
Dus de mensen uit de buurt.
The neighbors did not call the police, but Overduin. There are 2 kids alone in a house, and he would go there and take care of it.
En loste het dus op.
En toen kwam hij...
And then he told us, we have helped Jewish people through the war. Now, the Nazi children are the victims. That is what keeps me occupied now. That was surprising, that he did this personally.
Dat maakte toch wel indruk. En dat heeft...
Convinced some people to not help the NSB members, but to help Overduin.
NSB'ers te helpen, maar laat ik het heel neutraal zeggen, om dominee Overduin te helpen, omdat als het Overduin...
If Overduin asked something like that, you would obey.
Moest je daar maar aan gehoor geven.
Children are children. You cannot judge them because of their parents' actions.
En Overduin heeft zich over...
Overduin took care of the children. Some of them stayed at his house.
En we sliepen hierboven.
We slept upstairs. We stayed there a lot, sometimes for long periods. He showed me the safe room, under the ground here. He took me there as a little boy, which was very exciting.
Dat was natuurlijk heel spannend. Dus eigenlijk was
This was a paradise, actually.
Vond ik prachtig. Ja, vond ik prachtig.
I thought it was brilliant. There were those who thought it was terrible, thought he was deranged, helping the enemy all of a sudden. My mother also admired it. We thought it was fantastic. He really was a people person.
Hij werd daarop.
Not everybody treated him in a positive way because of this.
And the Jews themselves, they resented him for it.
Een mevrouw die woonde aan de Getversingel.
A Jewish lady we knew said he should go to therapy since he went crazy.
Ja.
Ik liep met Overduin hier.
I walked here with Overduin from this house, and people scolded, saying he was an NSB member from the Dutch Nazi Party. They called me SS Kid. I did not know what that meant. I remember he smiled at me, as if to give me courage.
Alleen, hij hoefde nog geen...
The difference was, now he did not have to wear glasses, or put on a fake mustache or a strange coat. He continued like he had before.
After the war, Overduin lived here at the Laatste Street, close to his own church. Every day he holds office here, and people are lined up. People are waiting with all kinds of problems. It is after war, complete chaos. Overduin helps everybody who asks for it. If you are hungry, you will get a bag of potatoes. If you do not have a place to sleep, you will get a mattress.
Also, the Jews who came back lost everything. The house was completely empty.
Het was helemaal leeg. En we dachten, waar is ons spul allemaal?
Where is everything? She brought me my chair and said that this was all she could save.
En dan heeft Overduin bij menig Joods gezin gezegd...
Where did you leave your furniture? With whom? He would go there, saying, you have to give that back.
Teruggeven. Als nu terugkijken.
Looking back now on the activities of Leendert Overduin, you think at the moment maybe 1,000 people are busy answering questions about social dilemmas, family problems, etc. Which one of those people, the clients of those services, would love to have someone like Overduin?
Of zo iemand als Overduin was, waar je zo onbureaucratisch gewoon...
Where you get help with bureaucracy, and as good as it will get as a human being. That does not exist anymore.
Het was echt een hele grote ondergrondse woningbouw.
They were in charge of a large underground housing corporation that Overduin managed.
En uiteindelijk is het resultaat dat in Enschede veel meer overlevenden zijn.
In the end, Enschede had a lot more Jewish survivors than the rest of the Netherlands. That is a fact.
When he passed away, I got my diploma.
Toen kreeg ik...
I graduated from art school.
Hij lag met zijn toga in zijn kist, wat op zich al heel bijzonder is. Nou, de kerk puilde uit van de mensen en later...
He was wearing his robe in his coffin, which is very exceptional.
Toen de eerste mensen daar aangekomen waren, moesten de laatste...
When the first people arrived, the last ones still had to leave. A distance of 2 kilometers. That says enough about the interest from all over the world.
On the 17th of July, 1976, Leendert Overduin passes away, and a few days later he is buried here. It is literally full of people, a special group of people. There are people from Israel, resistance fighters, but also former NSB members and their children. There is a fellow pastor, and he reads the following words at his grave. There are special people whose names will be printed in papers, encyclopedias, who will remain known to posterity. Very few special people who remained this unknown and wanted to be this unknown. and meant so much for so many as Pastor Overduin.
Dominee Overduin.
Hij heeft ze gered. Ik luister, aandachtig. Ze leven, dankzij hem.
They are alive after the salvation of the weight of the yellow star. So pressing, so massive. No other piece of fabric ever felt like that. They lived, not then, locked up in the attic, a basement, a barn, hiding for hate. Life full of fear, grief and dread. It was not real living. He could not really live. Not after he saw what was happening to his fellow humans in his own town. He is alive still after using his life to save so many more. He lives in the stories, the experiences, the feelings of those who 80 years after life stopped. Still we can say, we are alive. He was really the main link. Unique in this country.
What Overduin has taught me is solidarity for people in need. He really has.
That there is trust in a source that has the will to live and also wants to do it well. That is Pastor Overduin. And he transferred that source in such a way that it is still valid for me.
En ook andere mensen helpen.
Helping others, like I have been helped. You know that you want to do something in return for everything you have been given.
A red line in my life was a question I have asked my Uncle Lane at around 10 years old. Who is God and where is he? And he said, my child, God is love between people. You have to look after each other in this world. And now I understand.